And a top focus in WION at this hour. Israelis are continuing their protest against the judiciary reform bills. The ongoing anti-government protests are expected to paralyze traffic as tens of thousands of demonstrators have taken to the streets against the judicial reform bills put forward by Netanyahu government. Thousands of demonstrators in the city of Kfar Saba in central Israel are on the streets. They are carrying Israeli flags and demonstrating against Prime Minister Netanyahu's judicial reform proposal. The demonstrators are continuing their march and police officials are leading the way. They are taking the reporters through an approved route as well. In the city of Kfar Saba, the demonstrators are signing the Declaration of Independence from when Israel was founded. It is a reminder that Israel was founded on the principles of democracy, which is what these protests are all about. The protesters believe that democracy is in danger. Listening. The massive anti-government demonstrations also led to U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's visit to Israel being slightly delayed. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is set to arrive in Israel later today. After arriving, Austin will take his meetings at a factory near the Tel Aviv airport, instead of meeting with Israeli officials in the defense ministry. This is due to the massive demonstrations which are expected to paralyze traffic across the country. Austin is set to meet Israeli defense minister as well and Netanyahu near the Tel Aviv airport. Netanyahu's controversial bill aims to reduce powers of the judiciary. The bill also aims to give the executive more powers in the selection of judges, something that his critics believe will compromise the judiciary's powers.
איתמר בן גביר, בעד. אביגדור ליברמן אינו נוכח. יאיר לפיד.
להלן תוצאות ההצבעה.
So I'm walking among the marchers in Kfar Saba, one of the largest centres of the protests over the past few weeks. And it remains to be seen what the people here feel about the compromise solution that's being proposed. The demonstrators are chanting, Yariv Lavin, Poza lo Polin. That means Yariv Lavin, here it's not Poland. And they're shouting, Bibi, Sarah, Poza lo Hungaria. Bibi and Sarah referring to the Prime Minister and his wife. Here is not Hungary.
For more on this, we're now being joined by correspondent Jody Cohen from Kfar Saba, one of the venues for protests. Hi, Jody. You're right now at the protest site. Also, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's plan to visit Israel had been completely scrambled by the political crisis and the protests in Israel. He's scheduled to reach Tel Aviv later today. How critical is his visit at the moment?
Right, so last week we saw a day of disruption. Today it's being billed as a day of resistance. As you said, I'm in Kfar Saba, which has seen some of the largest protests in recent weeks. There are marches and protests across the country, including at schools, high-tech centres, work strikes, even literary protests. Roads are expected to be more blocked than in previous protests, and some road blocking has been agreed in advance with the police. I was just in the crossroads here, which was completely blocked. Now we've been moved on and the marchers are moving on to the next location. We're not expected to see permits for blocking the streets around the airport in Tel Aviv, where major disruption is expected. Prime Minister Netanyahu is possibly taking a helicopter to reach the airport later today for his flight to Rome. And as you said, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin had to change his schedule, change his plans because of the expected protest disruption around the airport. Now, the protest comes as pilots warn the IDF chief that most reservists will cease flying if the overhaul passes. And it also comes amid talks of a compromise. The government has welcomed proposals put forward by some high-profile figures, including former Justice Minister Friedman, jurist Elbashan, National Security Advisor Eland, and protest leader Giora Yaron. And a compromise proposal has also provisionally been welcomed by Justice Minister Levin, who, as we know, has taken a tough stance on the judicial reforms. So the proposals would moderate critical issues. For example, judicial appointments would only be possible through consensus between representatives of the government, judiciary and opposition, and Parliament's ability to override the High Court striking down legislation would need 65 MPs instead of the 61 suggested by the government. But the people I've been speaking to here in Kfar Saba don't appear to be impressed by this compromise proposal.
Right, Jody, I was just coming to that regarding Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's trip to Italy. Tell us about the on-ground situation right now. The anti-government demonstrations which are taking place today are one of the biggest, and they're expected to paralyze the traffic across the country, especially with, like you mentioned, Netanyahu's visit to Italy, and he is apparently not flying through the airport. He's taking a private chopper. Tell us more on that.
Right, because the protesters are planning to block the entrance to the airport. They've warned passengers in advance to be in touch with their airlines to try to arrive by train. But as we know, there are protesters planning to disrupt the trains, planning to block the entrance to the airport. And they've also announced that there are going to be some surprises, which they're not telling us right now what those are going to be. So they are expecting disruption. Now, as we know, Prime Minister Netanyahu has reportedly met Justice Minister Levin 3 times in recent days about the need for a compromise. And he was warning reportedly of the potential consequences of the proposals for diplomacy, for the economy, for security and for social cohesion, and said the plan must be softened. But the opposition has described potential compromise as the same proposal in fancy dress costume, basically. Opposition leader Lapid said that Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Herzog might adopt it, suggesting that potentially President Herzog is supportive of this proposal, but that Lapid said the protest movement and the opposition must still reject it. So the weekly protests are likely to continue. The legislation is likely to continue next week in Parliament, and that's thought to be a strategy to put pressure on the opposition to accept some sort of compromise. Meanwhile, there are still no direct talks, and with the coalition saying that there must be no preconditions to negotiations, and the opposition saying there'll be no talks until the legislation is halted.
Thank you, Jody, for getting us up to speed on that. Thanks very much.